All right, we are now live. Welcome everyone who is watching us live on Sunday night here on May 17th. I'm Rob Orson with Emerging Revolutionary War, and welcome back to our Sunday night happy hours, or Rev War Revelry, or however you want to call them. I am joined by an esteemed historian and three other guys who just showed up. Real quick, Mark Malloy, who is a regular here on Zoom and author of a great book about Trenton and Princeton. Something tells me his turning point tonight will be something to do with Trenton and Princeton. We have Billy Griffith here, licensed fellowship guide at Gettysburg, and his book on Monmouth should be out any second now, really at the printer, looking at the Battle of Monmouth and how that impacted the war. We have Philip Greenwald from lovely Southern Miami, and a great author as well, but from Southern Florida, holding his book about Lexington and Concord. And then we have Vanessa Smiley, who is gracious enough to be here. Hopefully will not ruin her reputation tonight. But Vanessa works National Park Service and has spent some time in the Southern campaigns, which obviously we all believe is very important to how the war ends. So our topic tonight is turning points. Kind of a broad topic. It doesn't have to be military, it can also be political. There are a lot of different turning points during the American Revolution. And if you're watching and you have questions or other comments, please put them in the comment box. We will be watching those. Have fun to have a good debate there on the side. Last week we had some really good debates going on. We love to see that. So how we're going to start here basically is just kind of go around the room here and let everyone kind of share one of their turning points. And I think everyone has probably multiple turning points. I could probably guess a few of these tonight. But what we're going to do is start with Mark Malloy, because he's at the top of my screen and he's smiling as if something is funny. First, Mark, actually, before you start talking about history, what kind of beer are you drinking tonight? What's your beverage of choice tonight?
Yes. So I'm drinking this is Antietam Brewery, Hager Weiss Hefeweizen. Of course, I chose this because it is historical. They kind of got me with the label with the cannon on it. And it is a German beer, and actually fits right in with my my turning point, which had to do greatly with German soldiers during the Revolutionary War. And I would argue the turning point of the Revolutionary War, the most important event of the war, some would say most important event in American history, is the 10 crucial days and the battles of Trenton and Princeton that happened between Christmas 1776 and January 3rd, 1777. And the real reason why that is the biggest turning point is just because of how close to utter destruction the American cause was, the precipice they were on. It looked like everything was pretty much over. And as we mentioned earlier, I wrote a book about it, Victory or Death. And that was the code word of the crossing of the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton was victory or death. And it really was this moment where, Washington's army had been, brutally beaten all across New York and New Jersey in the summer and fall of 1776. And his army went from numbering over 23,000. At one point, he could only count 3,000 men under his command. So he had massive amounts of, those are guys being killed, wounded, desertions, people just fleeing the cause. During their retreat, Thomas Paine wrote the immortal words, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." Like, this was the moment that everything hinged. Had General Howe and his troops been able to crush Washington at this moment, the Revolutionary War would probably just be down in history as a footnote of a minor rebellion. Probably not minor, but major, but it would have been a rebellion that had been crushed and had kept part of the American or part of the British Empire. But Washington turns the tables in one of the most daring moves, crosses the Delaware. Most people know that story, crossing the Delaware, from that famous painting. But you can see behind me, I got a painting here of the event that followed after it. Most people don't know about that. And so Washington crossed the Delaware. We all know that. And then he marches through a snowstorm 9 miles, attacks a Hessian outpost. Hessians were the German mercenaries who were hired by the British to fight in the American colonies, and surprises them. They weren't drunk. If you want to hear more about some of the myths of this campaign, be sure to check out our symposium, which hopefully is still going to be happening this September in Alexandria. But Washington surprises them. They capture over 900 Hessian prisoners. A couple days later, Washington's also going to defeat some British during the Second Battle of Trenton, then march around the British flank and attack their rear guard at Princeton, and then goes to Morristown, New Jersey for winter quarters. And in just the course of 10 days, Washington went from a dying cause to all of a sudden men were coming in to join up with the American cause. And in my opinion, like I said, and many historians have agreed that these 10 days saved the revolution. In my mind, there is no greater turning point in the revolution and in American history, really.
Fair enough, Mr. Malloy. I think we all would have guessed that would have been your turning point. Are there any good books about this turning point, other than your own, Mr. Malloy? Other than your own book, which is great, but if people want to read more about Trenton and Princeton, where would you direct them, other than your book?
Other than my book, of course.
Other than
we definitely David Hackett Fisher has a great book, Washington's Crossing, that really lays it out really well. So I definitely recommend that. There are many other books about the 10 crucial days. A couple recent ones that just came out. There's one by Larry Kidder called 10 Crucial Days, and then there's also one by David Price about the Battle of Assunpink Creek, which was that a second battle of Trenton that people don't really hear about. So, but yeah, there's lots of opportunities to learn about it, and it's really well, today, and I hope we get into this later in this conversation. But, one of the things we like to do in Emerging Revolutionary War is the power of place, going to the actual sites where the battles happen. Unfortunately, Trenton, today is the center of a major city. So there's not, a whole lot of the area that's been preserved, but there is places like the Old Barracks Museum that interpret the story, and there are numerous monuments and markers throughout the city that tell that important story. So.
Well, that's a good segue. I was going to put you on the spot. If you had to pick one place to visit, you had 3 hours to visit one place, what would it be for Trenton and Princeton?
You have 3 hours?
3 hours.
You have to visit one place?
One place.
Dude, that's tough. I would, being on the city streets, like I said, to me, it's very powerful because the events happen there. And even though you're just staring at concrete and, big buildings, I know what happened, just underneath your feet. So I would still recommend going down the city streets of Trenton. But I would say the other most powerful place, they preserve the site where the crossing happened, but to me, that's, the painting has etched in mind that iconic moment. But if you want to see a really cool place, I'd say the Princeton State Battlefield Park, because that's been part of the battlefields that's been preserved in part by the state. And recently, the American Battlefield Trust helped preserve part that was about to be developed on. And there is where Washington really earned his, where he became most famous, because at one moment, he actually leads his soldiers in a charge, in front of the troops. That one of his soldiers said, when I saw him risk all the dangers of the field, his important life hanging, as it were, by a single thread with 1,000 deaths around him, I thought not of myself, and rallied the troops and won the victory. And being out there on the site, especially on a cold winter's day when there's snow on the ground, that's pretty powerful.
Great. No, that's the best part about your book is you take people to these places. You can actually go and visit these places, so it ties in the story really well.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I'm glad that the states and the city have done work to try to preserve stuff. It's a shame there's no National Park Service footprint there. It's nationally significant events, but it's really been the localities that have been doing the preservation and stuff. But hopefully more people will learn this story and give it the importance that it deserves.
Great. Well, Mr. Greenwalt, sir, first off, what beverage are you enjoying this evening?
Just a IPA from Goose Island, but I decided to put it in a single island, thin glass. Best I can do down here in South Florida. We really don't have pictures of cannons on beers here. Palm trees, but
yeah, palm trees are nice.
Yeah. Initially I thought a turning point, obviously, new publication coming out sometime within the next few months, year on Valley Forge will be a turning point. But actually, I was reviewing notes for a conference that I was supposed to go to with the American Battlefield Trust, name dropping here. It was on the road to revolution. And one of the questions from working at a different national park unit was like, when did that happen? When did they go from being British colonists to, Lexington, Concord, et cetera? And so I was reading up on the pre-war, and I think one of the turning points is what we call the Intolerable Acts or the coercive acts that hit the colonies. Of course, it's centered on Boston, getting Boston to pay for the Boston Tea Party and so forth. But I came across a account from a town in Connecticut who was up in arms about what they did to the Bostonians, and how they said right there that they actually took a copy of the bill and publicly executed it. Which was interesting. And they built a Liberty Pole and so forth. And they still, 7 years later, greeted the French as they marched through this town in Connecticut on their way to meet with Washington's army to head south. One of the turning points, what is a turning point to get, we have this 12-year period from French and Indian War to the American Revolution. What turns these colonists from being the height of the British to that? Is it one thing? Is it multiple things? Is there really a turning point? So I just wanted to throw that out there because we don't really mention about how they became revolutionaries. It takes a lot more than just them popping up on the green at Lexington or at the North Bridge at Concord. It takes a lot of motion, and it also got me thinking because, of course, Sam Adams does a lot to be a political agitator throughout those war years. But since this is about battles, I don't want to upset Mark Malloy.
It doesn't have to be.
It's about military encampments. Military encampments. The turning point, is the 6 months that happened at the Valley Forge that forges the Army, if I could put a play on words there. You have the remaking of the Quartermaster Department, the remaking of course, the Army under von Steuben. You have Washington kind of defeating some of his political enemies, but you also have the shared hardship and kind of the surrounding of his a network that'll see him through the war with some of his staff officers like Lawrence or Lafayette. And of course, getting rid of some of the malcontents like Mifflin and Conway during it. You also have of course, the emergence of the French, but his first actions after Baron Hill in May of 1778, and then Monmouth show that the Army's going to be different coming out. So turning points showing that they can defeat the British. I just watched the crossing last weekend again, and the first time, of course, they attacked. So that's a turning point militarily. It's reinforced, okay, how do we follow it up? And it's really followed up by what happens at Valley Forge, that there is still an army left. Not only did they survive one hard winter, they survived a second hard winter. I know we have some folks from Morristown watching, survived multiple hard winters. And so those are the turning points, the winter encampments, when the soldiers, there's still an army to come out of these winter huts. Because we can all say, yeah, we want to be there to defeat the British, but do you want to starve and freeze in a hut eating bark or rocks or nothing at all? So turning points happen sometime off the battlefield is the final point I make. So
that's a good point. As far as if somebody was interested, so all right, I'm about to make you pick one of these parks, Phil. Morristown or Valley Forge? Which one do I have to see?
Well, so that's easy.
Vanessa would like to know.
So that's easy right now because Valley Forge is redoing their visitor center. So technically you should wait to see Valley Forge and head to Morristown, because Morristown actually beat Valley Forge ahead of the curve by redoing a whole new interactive exhibit that brings in these other elements, including one of the most interesting things is what a soldier should wear and what a soldier was actually wearing. And it's interesting to see the difference of that. So Morristown also too is because everyone likes Hamilton. Hamilton meets his wife there, so you have that, and Vanessa can stop giving me that smirk.
I just think you just copped it out. Like, man, what a cop out.
I'm a federal worker in the National Park Service. I gave the non-political answer there. So
That's true. That's true. Although I will give you props for talking Valley Forge, because that's one of the things, in advance of, the hard winter at Morristown. I mean, they learned a lot of lessons at Valley Forge that they implemented at Morristown, which, despite being the worst winter in history at that and at that point in time, they did not have nearly as many men die. So I will give you some credit for that.
I think one of the best quotes, is from the historian there, Eric Olson. It says the reason that Morristown is not remembered is no one died. They were saying they had less than a few hundred or a few thousand die there during the winter, and they were camped there so long. So Valley Forge, although it wasn't that bad a winter, more people die, so you remember it. So they're too successful at Morristown, either hiding behind the mountains, dealing with smallpox, which they did a previous winter, or learning the lessons of Valley Forge. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
Disturbance. We'll pass it on. Why don't we pass it on to Vanessa now? That
Yes.
I can her.
Perfect segue. So Vanessa, let's take a shot.
Take a shot. Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Drink it first.
Got it.
Take a shot at it. How's that?
I'll take a shot at it. So I am going to be talking about a turning point, surprisingly, in the Southern campaign. So in order to honor that, I'm drinking a white zombie from Catawba Brewing, which is out of North Carolina, which hints at my turning point. I'm going to upset a lot of my previous coworkers by not mentioning or by not saying that Kings Mountain, nor Cowpens, nor 96, and of course, nor the Over Mountain Victory Trail as the turning point. I'm actually going to be talking about Guilford Courthouse.
Whoa! Whoa!
It's the Mariners.
I know. So I know it's a big shocker, right? But it's one of those things where, so I got a chance to work at Guilford Courthouse as the acting superintendent last year. And I was really excited about it because I had been immersed in some of the, obviously the history of my parks at the time. And I was like, great, there's a book. It's, The Road to Guilford Courthouse. I'm going to be, getting to the end of essentially that story. But it really was enlightening in the sense of what that battle built towards. And it really, to me, I think is a very significant, if not the most significant turning point of the war, because it's really one of the last dominoes, if not the last domino that falls to lead to Yorktown. So you've got in, October of 1780, you've got Greene taking over the Southern campaign. Also in October, you have the Battle of Kings Mountain. So holla to my Kings Mountain folks. Even though Jefferson said it was the turning point of the American Revolution, that's not what I'm talking about today. And so Greene, what's really fascinating is the fact that Greene decides to divide his army, which is not, it's a little unconventional. He takes a risk at that, but Cornwallis follows suit by dividing his army. And so you've got the Battle of Cowpens. So see, I mentioned Battle of Cowpens. You've got the Battle of Cowpens, and it's a major victory for Greene and for Morgan, who of course was leading the battle at Cowpens. It's a huge victory, and it's a huge detriment to Tarleton and the dragoons and his cavalry forces. So Cornwallis is basically pissed off. And he's kind of like, all right, I'm going after Greene. And that's how they end up essentially at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And what's interesting as well is that Cornwallis only has about 2,000 men, and Greene has double that. So Cornwallis is outnumbered, and yet he's still like, I'm going after him. Greene takes the page out of Morgan's book, and he does that 3-line defense. And it's I had to look this up because I wanted to make sure. It's the defense in depth strategy. See, now I sound like a real historian. And he, and so Greene sets this up and sets up this defense, and the British Army makes it through those first those first two lines, gets to the third. And Greene is recognizing that even though he has more forces, he wants to keep his army intact. He's still been trying to rebuild the Southern Army, and he still has a lot that he wants to accomplish. And he knows he can't do that if he just throws all of his guys at the British, because that's gonna ruin his army. Unlike Cornwallis, who's like, no, I'm going after him. And there's this intense fighting, but then Greene retreats. And so essentially it's a victory for the British. It's called a Pyrrhic Victory, which essentially means that, yes, it's a victory, but Cornwallis suffers such a significant loss of men. It's a quarter of his men at this battle, that it's one of the reasons that he doesn't follow Greene, which if he ended up following Greene, I think he would have ended up and proceeding to go after him, he would have ended up with some American supply lines and may have actually been able to continue and defeating him. But instead, Cornwallis backs up to the coast in Wilmington, where he's got a supply base. And he kind of is like, all right, let me see if I can, let me reassess the situation. Well, it's such a devastating defeat. Even politicians over in Britain are talking about it. There's Charles James Fox, which is how he's referenced in just about every reference. Charles James Fox, that's where we get that quote, another such victory would ruin the British Army. And it's true, because if things had gone differently, the war could have ended right then and there at Guilford Courthouse if Greene didn't want to keep his army together. But he knew that it was not the time or the place. So Cornwallis hangs out in Wilmington for a while and then decides, you know what? Nope, I'm going to go up to Virginia, which is where eventually he surrenders in Yorktown several months later. So Guilford Courthouse, like I said earlier, Guilford Courthouse is kind of like that last domino that falls. And Cornwallis just can never recover. He and his army can never recover from that victory, which was also a defeat.
So your comment has stirred a little controversy over here on the chat window.
Oh no!
So I have to give you one question, because we at ERW, we do not squash any opinions. We don't block anybody. We don't get rid of comments. We share everything here. Someone wants to know, in order to be a turning point, wouldn't things have to be going great for Cornwallis up to that point?
Depends on, I think, the perspective. If it's a turning point for Cornwallis in terms of whether or not he's going to succeed at something, it's probably not a turning point for him, but it's a huge turning point for Greene, because it's an opportunity for Greene to keep his army together, to continue to fight it out in the Southern campaign. Doesn't mean he's always successful. I'm talking about 96, but he can continue his assault in the Southern colonies. Even though he doesn't take out Cornwallis, he's done enough damage to Cornwallis, and he knows that he still has some more work to do, or at least he knows he still has a chance if his army is together. He's just rebuilt this army. He comes in October, and he basically is like, all right, I got to get me recruits. I tried to look up the different regiments because I wanted to make sure I knew, but I ran out of time. But he starts to recruit some folks in order to bulk up his army again, because they weren't really doing that great in the Southern campaign. Everything was happening up north. I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past, of how Northern campaigns seem to capture a lot of attention. But Greene, by keeping his army together, he's able to keep up the assault on the Southern colonies and helping to reduce the impact that the British have in some of the controlled areas of the Southern colonies. So that's where I see it as a turning point. He decimates Cornwallis. Basically, Cornwallis is trying to get his revenge on Greene, and Greene's like, I don't think so. And even though it's a victory, Cornwallis basically he has to struggle now to keep his army intact and to build it back up. And he just can't seem to do that, which is one of the reasons why he goes up into Virginia, because he thinks he's got a better chance up there. And he doesn't. So that's why I think it's a turning point. But I love that it caused some controversy in the comments, because that's
I have more questions.
Favorite things about all this.
I have more questions for you. We'll get to Billy and we'll come back. I've been writing them down. So,
okay.
No one has questions for Phil or Mark, but for Vanessa, they want to hear from the expert, which I totally understand, by the way.
Hold on, let me just. Thank you very much. No, I love that this sparked conversation. I love that.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I was just too thorough. That's why you don't have questions for Mark and I. We were just too thorough and nailed the point.
I don't think so, but okay, Phil, you stay with that.
Trenton and Princeton, so it is what it is. So.
Billy, I can't wait to hear what your turn.
Yes, Billy, and Billy,
Thank
Mark is offended by the flag over your shoulder, but that's okay. He'll get over it.
We told him last week he needs to take that down and put up a Betsy Ross flag.
Remember, it's just a piece of fabric. But,
That's a whole nother call. Go ahead, Billy.
So I think all of the things that have been mentioned today, they were turning points, you can say, within their own regard for the context of when and where they took place. But in my mind, a turning point is something that is just so drastically important that it literally shifts everything on another course, where the beneficiary of whatever that result was never really can recover from that or have their own major turning point. So when it comes to the revolution, I think that major turning point, it's not necessarily a military action. The military action did lead to it, but it is what comes in February of 1778, when France finally recognizes us as an independent nation and starts throwing all that military aid and financial aid our way. Now, France had been covertly aiding the American cause prior to this, as early as 1776, but they were very hesitant of actually getting involved militarily, because that meant actually going against Britain, once again, their age-old enemy. But when they finally decide to join after the victory at Saratoga in October of 1777, that's going to throw everything in the Americans' way now, because Britain is going to have to alter their entire wartime strategy. Okay, what's happening in the colonies now becomes secondary to that enemy right across the English Channel in France. And even in 1779, the British are actually preparing for a French invasion of the mainland. Okay, that navy that they had sent half of it to the British or to the America, it's all going to have to be focused on the French fleet now and guarding that channel. They're also going to have to worry about their financial possessions and economical possessions in the West Indies. There's sugar islands, much more lucrative than what they can actually have in Canada as well as the colonies. So their attention is going to focus to begin to focus to protecting those interests. And that means they're going to begin pulling their forces away from the inland of the American colonies towards the eastern seaboard, focusing in the Northeast between New York City and Rhode Island. And now they're also going to shift forces down to the South so they can use them to potentially bring the Southern colonies back into His Majesty's dominion. They'll think that's their best chance for victory because, once again, they wrongly believe that's where the most loyalist help will come from. And they will quickly find out that that is not the case. And really, they're never going to be able to have an upper hand against the Americans after that. So as I said, all these other things that we mentioned tonight, I think they're more so sustaining moments that keep things going in the correct direction for us. More so, plugging the dam with bubble gum before something can actually come back and push that Russian water away. But France entering the war, in my opinion, I don't think there really is in America without their help. And I know it's cliche and a lot of historians do agree with that, but to me, that's the most important event of the American Revolution.
Well, you have people who agree with you. So, Saratoga is coming up as a popular comment here, which obviously ties in with France's entry into the war. So to make you kind of play and everyone's now saying, Dan Welch, who we give no credit to, by the way, says Billy wins. Zoom over, good night all, which means, Billy, you don't win, because if Dan likes your idea, it can't be great.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead. No, please. Yeah, please.
I just wonder, Billy, just from your perspective, do you think if they had waited, how do you think that would have changed? I know that's just positing right now, but if they had waited any longer, do you think things would have been different?
If France had waited longer to join the war?
Yeah,
I do. Okay, and that's another, Phil was talking about Valley Forge and sustaining through that winter. Finding out that France has now come in on our sides officially, that's a huge, huge, huge boost in morale for those Continentals who have just suffered through the winter months of 1777, 1778. And also France's entry perpetuates the British to abandon Philadelphia. They need to focus their power on the Eastern Seaboard now. And that's why Henry Clinton's army is leaving Philadelphia in the spring of 1778 and beginning their march across New Jersey towards New York City. That will eventually culminate in the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse on June 28, 1778. And I think that was just a sign for the positive things to come for the American cause.
Hey, Rob, since we're asking questions of other historians, we never asked Vanessa, what's one place? Guilford, Kings Mountain, 96. Pick one place to visit.
This is true. This is true. Bill's being fair.
You had to do that. You had to do that. To be honest.
Or
To be
Morristown.
honest here. Don't tell anybody. This is just among us, right?
Right.
Of the sites, honestly, I would pick 96. It is the best preserved earthen fort from that time. It is not just Rev War history, although Rev War history is kind of what puts it on the map. It has more than one battle. It has engineering with the mines from the great mind of Kosciuszko. I never can pronounce his name right. Kosciuszko. I mean, it's and then of course there's the early of French and Indian War history there, as well as the trading. So 96 has a wealth of history. It also has some amazing stuff to see there. It's a tiny little site. You have to want to get there to get there. It's like half an hour, 40 minutes off of any major highway. But just the amount of resources that are still there that they're continuing to do research on, doing archaeological studies, etc. It's just a tiny little site packed with so much history that I have to say, if you've got some time, go to 96.
I agree. 96 is a great spot, and you're right. It does. You have to really want to go there. Like that has to be the focus of that trip, and it's definitely worth the focus. It is. It's great. A few years ago, the dastardly Burt Dunkerley took me out there, and it was a great trip. Even though Burt was there, it was a great trip. So that's my love for Burt right there. But it's a great site. Billy, I forgot to ask you what you were drinking before you espoused about France. Is it wine, French wine? Is that what you're drinking?
No, it's Coors Light. The mountains are blue right now.
I had to ask. Billy, as far as France goes, and you might have said this, I might have been commenting on the side here. What do you think was the single biggest factor in France coming in? Like, what do you think made them make that decision to go ahead and go all in?
Because they were just truly waiting for a military victory worthy enough that they could finally say, all right, this is a good time. They're just waiting for their moment. They already knew that the Continental Army was capable of standing toe-to-toe with the British. At least they were inspired to believe that by even American defeats like at Germantown in October of 1777. They see there's hope, and then they see them sustaining throughout the winter of Valley Forge. But the biggest one is that surrender of John Burgoyne's 5,000 men or so British army to Horatio Gates in October of 1777. And for the British, that is a big blow as well, because they're starting to come to the realization that they might not be able to reconquer this continent and really suppress this American uprising. Then once France, the larger threat to them, joins, then that's really, like I mentioned, we're going to become the secondary focus of their war effort.
I always like to play devil's advocate in this debate, because I always say that, the United States could have, even if France hadn't entered the war, and I do agree with you, I think that it changed the tactical view, the map for the British entirely. But I think that, at this point, by the time the news gets to them, 1778, the Americans have now been fighting for almost 3 years. I think France's intervention definitely shortened the war to an 8-year conflict, as opposed to, I think the Americans could have continued fighting on their own as long as Washington and whatever small band of guys he had would keep going. I think they could have lengthened the war. I think it would have kept going, but it would have just been much, much more long drawn out. And it may not have been what we have today, where you have 13 United States that come out of it. Some states may have eventually, with loyalist support, gone back to England or whatever. But you know, I always think it's interesting because I think we always point, you know, I was surprised that Saratoga took so long to pop up on the screen because usually, you know, we just went up there this past fall and it was, you know, it's the turning point. Oftentimes is described as Saratoga, the turning point, which as a Trenton Princeton guy myself always take exception to. But you know, but it is interesting because the major thing at Saratoga, the turning point is, well, it got France involved. Well, you know, could we have done it without France's involvement? You know, maybe not, but maybe yes. I don't know. I mean, it's a what if in history, and I like to play devil's advocate and say, you know, we might have been able to go on without them in being involved. But
I think that's another Zoom call, like
Wow.
Zoom history.
You're also getting comments about Spain and the Dutch as well, who also, you know, the Dutch, you know, financed a lot of what the Americans were doing, and having Spain involved too, you know, really makes it a world war. So I think people.
Like I said originally to Billy's point, you know, changing the map. I mean, that's one of the big questions. And Billy's got a book coming out about Monmouth soon, and it's like, why were the British? Why did they leave the capital city of the United States? And it was entirely because of this. Okay, France is involved. Yeah, now this is, you know, they were beating up on a bunch of farmers with pitchforks out here in the colonies, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we need to defend. You know, we have more important things to defend, whether it be the homeland or the Caribbean or other things like that. And yeah, I think it's really surprising to a lot of people that the Revolution was a world war. And that there were naval battles all across the whole globe. Yeah. So it's
just to add on to that, what's one thing that France gave us that we did not have during the war? That's a navy, sea power. And you know, as the American Revolution begins, Britain has the most powerful navy in the entire world, and they've been, you know, basically keeping control of the sea here in America, and we had no way of really getting around them. So now France coming, they built it. That's one of the other reasons too. They waited to actually join this conflict, is because they didn't have the naval strength to oppose the British. They had to wait to build up their navy just enough so they could finally make a move. And then they do end up sending several fleets to America. And in the end, it's the France will claim power of the sea, at least in the southern colonies, like at Yorktown. And that's one of the biggest reasons too why the British fell there.
So kind of going back to some of our questions here, which we have great discussion going on here. I'm going to turn this back to Vanessa, or even Phil for this matter. So let's talk about Kings Mountain for a little bit, because you know, that is advertised as one of the major turning points of the American Revolution. I know you picked Guilford, but could Vanessa or Phil talk about Kings Mountain a little bit? Why that's considered by many to be one of the most important events that take place, at least in the Southern campaign.
I'll refer to this former chief there first. Gentlemen.
So it was tough to not pick Kings Mountain, and I intentionally tried to steer away from that, because that is kind of, at least in the Southern campaign, that's kind of that quintessential, it's the turning point, because of what Thomas Jefferson said about it. But of course, I can't really say that 100%, because I also worked at those other parks, like Cowpens was in and of itself a turning point. So that's why I kind of appreciate the way Billy was talking about turning points and kind of what that actually means, and what can be considered a turning point. Because the parks I worked at, all of them were turning points. And so Kings Mountain is really, one of the things I really love in studying the history of Kings Mountain is that these are not regular army soldiers. They are not trained British, you know, regulars. These are militia who are coming from that area, and you know, the southern colonies as a whole with the over mountain men. And these are literally colonists fighting colonists. And it's one of those, I think I mentioned this the last time I was on with you guys about, you know, the Revolutionary War in the South was kind of the first American Civil War because of the militias that were building up. You have in the upstate of South Carolina, you've got loyalist and patriot, or whatever term you want to use, because I know there's issues with using those terms. their neighbors, brothers, family members that are really divided on which side to choose. And so Kings Mountain is this situation where it's militia. The true British, from Britain there is Patrick Ferguson. And so he's kind of the outlier in this, even though he's now he's one of the ones buried there. He also has a little lady friend buried with him as well. But that's another story. So it's a testament to both sides, loyalist and patriot, for the militia troops. I know you guys were talking militia, what was it, last week? And I think it's a testament to what they can accomplish. Now, there was also a testament between rifle and musket, and for one of the few times, I think, in the Revolution, you are at a disadvantage when you are at the high point. You always want to take the high ground, but you've got the loyalists who are using predominantly musket, and you've got the patriots who are using predominantly rifles, and it's the rifles that are winning this battle. Which I can go into all the idiosyncrasies of why, but it's also just another mark of, because of the type of ground that it was taking place, with the size of trees and with the type of men who are fighting. It's a pretty intense conflict that has different layers to it than I think any other battle in the American Revolution, and it's one of the big wins that the Patriots needed to keep Patriot support in the Carolinas, in the Southern colonies. So this was really needed. I was talking earlier about how Greene had to come down, or not had to. He came down and had to rebuild the Southern Army. Part of that was because things weren't going so great in the South, and this was one of those key victories that helped bolster the cause for the Patriots in the upstate.
And it really does highlight that Civil War aspect that you find not just in the South, but even in like New Jersey as well, with Loyalists and Whigs or Patriots, however you want to call them, fighting amongst themselves, which is much overlooked, I think, by the general histories of the war, is that Civil War aspect. Mark, you are.
Actually,
go ahead, Phil. I won't make fun of Mark in a second, but I'll let you go ahead first.
I just wanted to jump in and besides just saying ditto for Vanessa, but I think
I gave you a chance to go first, Phil.
I know one of the things I want to build up is that what Kings Mountain ruins as well is the perception of British might as well. Perception. So the British know that they can't, of course, occupy the countryside, so they need loyalists or people to show that are of power. And that way they can combine certain coasts like 96 or Camden or wherever else, and that way they can rely on. But these overmountain men come over and they basically pluck a hole in that strategy. And so what a turning point is that eventually you see that the emergence of people like Thomas Sumter and Francis Marion and all the ones start to take, who have been behind the scenes and keeping that little light alive for the revolution, suddenly become foremost. And what happens when Greene comes back with the reconstituted army? These guys have kind of paved the way. He relies on a lot of them. I think William Davy, if I'm not mistaken, helps him with as he's retreating back to North Carolina. A very militia commander knows the rivers and so forth. So it's the perception that after Kings Mountain is that, okay, the British are vulnerable, and that being a loyalist might not give you the protection of the British anymore. And that's leads that Civil War. And I mean, I'm surprised no one put the Patriot in there. I know we had a Benjamin Martin comment from somebody, but I mean, there is that perception of, okay, tit for tat as you build it up. And Kings Mountain shows that, okay, that the colonists can give it as good as they get. So the perception is a turning point as well. And it's very tough when you have a limited manpower like the British do, and now you're faced with a world war. I do want to have a Zoom in the future about what if France didn't enter the war, because I think Mark's trying to make a Civil War point that Washington could be like Lee and try to, as long as he stayed alive, the war would stay alive. But Washington would have had his own Appomattox if it wasn't for the French.
You're killing Rob here. You're just killing him.
I don't even know where to go with any of that. Although
You wanted this to be a happy hour. I keep it a happy
people are
hour.
giving Mark a hard time. How could the Americans have won without the Dutch money, Mark? How could the Americans win without the French Navy? Mark is being picked on, which I love, by the way, personally.
Yeah.
Great.
I said when I initially said it's a devil's advocate position. The other thing about these turning points is the whole idea of turning points is based on a big perception of what if. The whole idea is if it didn't go down this one route, it could have gone down this other route. Well, nobody knows what would really happen if any of these things didn't go that way. So it's all just kind of conjecture. So it's good to,
Nice defense there, Mark. Nice defense. Okay, all right.
And
Looks like a true park ranger. Looks like a true MPS park ranger.
I do like Phil's analogy to Lee's army in the American Civil War, because you constantly are looking at turning points during the American Civil War, and that was something they were trying to do, was gain international allies. And correct, yeah, and yeah, Washington may have had his own Appomattox. Who knows?
Yeah. Hey, Mark. Well, what if the French don't join in 1778? Henry Clinton, or even if William Howe's still in command, launches a large attack out of Philadelphia against Washington and pummels him. Maybe Washington actually loses support, and he's not commander in chief anymore. Maybe Horatio Gates ends up taking command. Maybe somebody else.
Correct. Oh yeah. I mean, when you talk about turning points, and you're talking about not military specifically, like battles, naming George Washington commander in chief back in 1775 is huge. Like, what if there is no George Washington, there is no successful Revolutionary War. Period.
Oh, wait a minute.
Or you have something ending with a disastrous thing where Hamilton-like character gets commander in chief and then declares himself emperor of the new United States. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen, but the things we do know is Washington was very careful with all the power he got. If we didn't have him as our commander in chief, I think you would have had a very different outcome to the American Revolution.
Mark wouldn't have his obsession.
Exactly.
It was a turning point in Mark's life as well.
I do love.
Millions unborn were affected, as Washington said, by the conduct of his army.
All right, let's. I got one topic to throw out to the whole group. It's non-military. What about Thomas Paine and the crisis and common sense? That's right. That really turns the populace into, not all of the people in the country, but it turns a lot of people over to independence and supporting the patriot cause. Phil, I think you talk about that a little bit in Valley Forge, just how the will of the people and how that inspires the military. You want to talk about a little bit about Thomas Paine, or anyone can talk about Thomas Paine? I think someone else brought that up, and that's a good point. It's not military, it's not political. It definitely has a huge impact on how the war is fought.
I mean, yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I just was writing an essay for something else about common sense and the American crisis, and I think the common sense had something like 250,000 reprints. I mean, and copies, publications. It even made it to France, although they took out a little bit about the monarchy because that didn't really fit right with the Bourbons and all that there. But I mean, look at what we're doing today with Zoom and social media, is getting the word out about spreading the American Revolution. Look at one of the most famous icons in American history is "We Want You," the poster from World War II. To reach the people, you have to have a message. You have to have a common language. And you also build into that network, which goes under reported, is those committees of correspondence, being able to spread things quickly, get them out throughout the colonies. And so common sense puts it into writing what a lot of people may be thinking. And how many people do they reply to a comment on Facebook or to someone else talking on some social media channel saying, I was thinking that, but I didn't want to say it. Thomas Paine says it, and he says it in a language where people can adhere to it and really like they're speaking to him. And I mean, and it blows up, and it comes from a guy, I mean, who has agitated a little bit in England as well. I mean, before he even gets here, and then his American crisis, he's with the army. So I mean, he sees it firsthand. I think those two are some of the most underrepresented or underappreciated turning points, if we use that, or epic moments as in American history. because of the ability to reach the populace, to spread the message, to to make it a national 13 colony or 12 colony wide experience. And it's passed tremendously. I mean, 250,000 copies in 1775, 76 is a tremendous job.
It kind of lends itself to that that cliche almost, the pen is mightier than the sword. Right. That, you know, spreading that message and getting that word out in a way that people can be captured by, and they gravitate towards it. I mean, man, you know, and it's not necessarily, you know, just white men who are reading those words as well. It goes beyond that. So
yeah. Something no one has mentioned right now either is the Declaration of Independence, really changing the mission of the war. Obviously, that they have been fighting a war before July of 1776, and so the mission of the war does change with independence. Now we're not just fighting against policies; we're actually fighting for independence, which is a big change in how the motivational parts of the war. No one mentioned Billy leaving and coming back, because that would be awkward, but that's all right. Welcome back, Billy.
I just thought he was so frozen about Mark's comment about the French and so forth that he just couldn't handle anymore. He was looking a little like McClellan there. He was very static, wasn't moving.
Yeah, I just come back on here and like everything behind me is just wrecked. So angry.
Hey, Billy, I'm going to ask you a question about Saratoga. So, you know, we look at Saratoga being so important in bringing in the French. Where do you, and this is getting in the weeds here a little bit, but I think it's interesting just to talk about briefly, who's at fault for Saratoga on the British side? You know, there's so much debate about, you know, the two British columns meeting up, one, you know, not leaving from New York, going to Philadelphia instead. In your opinion, and I know you were up there with us last November, you know a lot about this. In your opinion, where did the British mess up at Saratoga? Not necessarily the actual battle, but looking at the whole campaign in general.
I think it's just more so just nothing went right for them. I'm not too sure if there were any real decisions made that cost Burgoyne his entire campaign. I don't believe that. It's just nothing went right. You look out at Fort Stanwix, one force that was supposed to meet up with John Burgoyne. They're stopped short. Henry Clinton moving up from New York City, who's supposed to meet up with John Burgoyne. He doesn't make it. And also Burgoyne is under the impression that William Howe is supposed to somehow form a juncture with him as well near Albany, New York. But Howe doesn't think that that's necessary for him to do. He's given free rein to just go off and try to take Philadelphia. But Burgoyne really still has the impression that he's going to form a junction with Howe. Things, yeah, they don't go right. I mean, look at an instance where a young loyalist woman named Jane McCrae is murdered by one of Burgoyne's allied Indians, Native Americans. And after that, Burgoyne kind of issues a reprimand, and they don't take it lightly. And he loses Native American support. He's losing militia support all along the route. His supply line is growing longer and longer. He has every base that he captures, like Fort Ticonderoga, he has to leave behind troops to garrison it. So he's just constantly losing men throughout his entire journey towards Albany. And eventually when Gates comes north, he's able to rally a lot of American militia and get more men into the field than Burgoyne is. There really isn't a chance, I think, during the entire campaign for Burgoyne to actually succeed in reaching Albany. Nothing was in his favor.
Right. So we have a few minutes left. We can take this time to pick on Mark or Phil.
Wait. Rob, okay. First of all, you have to tell us what you've been drinking this whole time. And then B, we want to hear what your turning point is.
I've been drinking Golden Ox. Kind of hard to see in the glass, in the shine here. Old Ox Brewery out of here in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, my home.
Yeah.
Wow, my turning point. I was going to go with Kings Mountain. I just think, you know, that changes how Cornwallis, you know, moves, and that just changes how everything works in the South. So I was going to go with Kings Mountain, but that's just my personal opinion. And Vanessa did a great job explaining that for me, so I appreciate that.
And what about the site to see where that turning? You suggest people go to Kings Mountain to see?
Yeah, Kings Mountain's a great park. Like I said, we were there. I was there a few years ago with Bert Dunkerley and Mark Wilcox and Doug Crenshaw. We go places every fall, every spring. And Bert showed us around. Bert used to work there. I think Bert used to work at every NPS park in the South. As Vanessa says, she agrees with me on that. But it's a great park, and it's a huge park because it's surrounded by a state park or state forest, and the national park is in the middle of that. So it's very well preserved as far as the view sheds go. And a great visitor center too.
And they have a great monument there too that basically just says that, right? This was the turning point of the war right here.
Yes.
And it's interesting that I wonder how often you see that, turning point, on
Well, I think Kings Mountain claims that because Thomas Jefferson said that Kings Mountain was the turning point. So that's why it's tough to think about even while I was there, talking about any of the other parks, because they in and of themselves are very significant. But Jefferson himself said it. So if he said it, I guess.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
Are we sure he said it, or he just snipped that part out of a different book and then put the words together?
He just did it. I'm not going to say one way or the other.
Was the report redacted? That's the question.
So does anyone else have any parting comments? We're about an hour into this. That's usually where we end things. So Mark and I can go put our kids to bed.
Well, Rob, you had mentioned about the Constitution, about the Declaration of Independence, and putting things to paper. I will disagree that it's potentially a turning point, because it's that at that point it's politics, and I'm not saying that that's not important, but I think and this is coming from somebody who studied the backcountry folk. Mm-hmm. They don't give a crap about that. So, and I mean that in the best sense, that's something that is not significant to them, and that's not what's going to push them to pick up arms and fight for the 13 colonies. Especially since they're, in the backcountry, they're a different set of folks. Maybe the folks in Charleston, and Mark could probably attest to this, maybe the folks in Charleston view the Declaration as something more important and impactful in their lives. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think.
No, that's fine.
That is a great observation. And I think that the rest of the ERW folks know this exact story, because this fall when we went up, one of the sites we visited up in New York was Fort Ticonderoga. And when we went into Fort Ticonderoga, we got a special tour from their curator there, which is awesome. And one of the things he pulled out was a journal from an officer that served in the American Army, and wrote down on the day, I think it was like July 23rd or whatever, when news came that the Declaration of Independence had been passed, he made
Mark froze on us. You froze, Mark.
Am I gone?
No,
we were on the edge of our seat, and he wrote what?
Go ahead.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
You're back.
Sorry. I know. I got you all on the edge of your seats, all right? He gets the news of the Declaration of Independence. He doesn't write anything about it. He says nothing of the significance of this event other than the password of the day was independence. And, life goes on. Well, whose journal was it? The guy who painted this painting you see right behind me, the same guy who painted the painting of the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson in the committee giving it. It was John Trumbull's personal diary. It was very revealing that, hey, here's the guy who basically recorded some of the history we know through art as great moments in American history. And when he got this news and his fellow soldiers, it didn't seem like it was as big a deal as we.
No big deal.
It was crazy.
That was cool. That was really cool seeing that. That was great.
That was very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on who you're talking. Yeah, who's hearing it, who's reading it. I think for some it was probably very powerful, but for others it was kind of like, okay, to put a finer point on it.
So just to wrap up a little bit here, some quick comments. People do not like Phil's library. It's a hard bunch, man. It's a hard, our people are a hard bunch.
Tough crowd.
Billy's disappearance is the turning point of this program. So we can imagine who said that, Billy. You can have a good guess. And TJ is not, there's not many fans of Thomas Jefferson in this crowd. There is not, I guess we have a Hamilton crowd. People love Hamilton. So I guess Jefferson is not very popular among our watchers right now. So
I'm not a big fan of his either, but for different reasons. So we'll just leave it at that.
That's another, we'll do that on another call. Why we hate Thomas Jefferson. I love TJ, but anyways. So, all right. Well, anyone have anything else they want to say before we wrap up here? I think we had a great discussion so far and great comments here on the, people picking on Phil and Mark basically, but it's been fun to read the comments over here. Any other comments? Last parting words? No?
I brought in a beer from New Jersey.
There you go. That's good. And Phil is trying to sell his book, which I appreciate because I think I helped write that book.
I mean, I was trying to give you some props saying, do you need a library? You just need this book, right?
That's right. You don't need a library. You just need that book. Oh, we've spiraled out of control, which we tend to do after an hour. Well, I want to thank each of you all for joining us. Thank you for Vanessa. Hopefully we see Vanessa again. Hope we haven't ruined it for her. But next week, for those who are watching, next week at 7 o'clock, we'll be talking about George Washington's role in the early part of the French Indian War. We do like to blog and write about not just Rev War, but also French and Indian and a little bit of War 1812, which we've had a few people comment. They like to see some War 1812 topics, so we'll do that later on. But next week, we'll have a special guest joining us. We'll share that in the blog during the week this week. He'll be joining us talking about the Braddock expedition and, of course, George Washington's role in Fort Necessity and the Braddock Road expedition. So check out the blog for more information about that. We'll be having some blog posts this week. I hear there's a possibility that Mark Malloy may have a blog post going up this week. So that right there, everyone, is worth your time checking out the blog.
If Mark actually blogs, I'll show my library. It'll be just blow everyone's mind.
I look forward to that, Phil. But
library, it's right there.
Gosh. As Mark mentioned, we do have a symposium coming up on September 26th in the city of Alexandria. Hopefully, we'll be still having that. We'll update you on the blog as we learn that. Obviously, with everything in flux right now with COVID, everything is up in the air. We hope to have that in September. Other than that, thank you everyone for watching. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. And thank you to the panelists for joining us.
Have a good one, guys.